Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So currently, election fraud is only a Class A misdemeanor. In contrast, illegal voting is already a second-degree felony. HB 5115 closes this gap by increasing the penalty for election fraud to second-degree felony to align with the penalty of illegal voting. Attempted election fraud is upgraded to a third-degree felony. The bill also expands the definition of election fraud to include knowingly including invalid votes, excluding valid votes, and altering reports to misrepresent vote totals.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Turner, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for some questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Representative Shaheen. So what is the current criminal penalty for election fraud?
So as I stated, the section that we're impacting, it currently is a Class A misdemeanor for the area that we're impacting on page 2.
Okay. And Class A misdemeanor, that the punishment for a Class A misdemeanor conviction is up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $4,000. Is that right?
I believe so, if I find my notes. I'll take your word for it. How's that?
Okay. Is it true that this bill enhances the penalty for election fraud from a Class A misdemeanor to a second-degree felony?
Yes, to align with the penalty for illegal voting.
For illegal voting?
Yep.
Okay. And the punishment for a second-degree felony is what? What is the range of punishment for a second-degree felony?
2 to 20 years in jail and a fine up to $10,000.
Okay, 2 to 20 years in prison, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And a fine of up to $10,000.
Yes, for a second-degree felony.
Okay. So, Class A misdemeanor, current law, up to 1 year in jail, fine of, we'll forget about the fines, let's set those aside.
Yep.
Class A misdemeanor, up to 1 year in jail, second-degree felony between 2 and 20 years in prison. Do I have that right?
Class A up to 1 year, second-degree, 2 to 20 years. That's correct.
Okay. So, it's a significant enhancement, is it not?
No.
What?
Class A is up to a year, and then a second degree is 2 to 20. So based on the judge's discretion, you might be adding another year.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think the maximum penalty for a Class A misdemeanor, again, setting aside the fines for purposes of simplifying the discussion, the maximum penalty for a Class A misdemeanor is 1 year in jail. You
That's
agree
right.
with that?
Up to a year.
Yes. The maximum penalty for a secondary felony is 20 years in prison. You agree?
Yes, but again, you have a judge's discretion,
Sure.
right? If it's the first time somebody
You always have a
did
judge's
it,
discretion.
circumstances. So it could be a 2-year penalty versus the maximum of a Class A of 1 year.
It could be, but it could also be 20.
Depends on the scenario.
Right, okay. So potentially the punishment for the same offense is increasing from 1 year in jail to 20 years in prison.
Or 1 year in jail to 2 years.
Fair enough. Would you agree in terms of the impact on an individual, and we talk a lot about, different criminal justice reforms that we have passed in this chamber, with the recognition that, people change, people might make a mistake early in life, and that shouldn't be necessarily determine the fate of their entire life. Would you agree that getting charged with a felony and spending between 2 and 20 years in prison could really unalterably upend a person's life?
Well, if you look at the language in the bill, we're talking about preventing a voter from casting a legal ballot. We're talking about providing false information to a voter with the intent of preventing the voter from voting, causing the ballot not to reflect the intent of the voter. These are incredibly serious crimes that are being committed.
I agree they are crimes, and I just want to make sure we have the level of when the crime is committed, they should be prosecuted. I agree with that,
Okay.
But I just want to make sure we have the right range of punishment for judges to be able to, exercise the discretion within.
And that's why the legislation creates consistency. So to your point, as you went into detail with respect to the new penalty for election fraud, it does align itself with illegal voting.
Okay. So I wonder, and I don't want to talk about another bill, but you and I recently had a discussion about another bill that expanded power to the Attorney General to prosecute these types of cases, right? If that bill passes, these types of cases could potentially be prosecuted by the Attorney General. Is that right?
If a local district attorney doesn't take action in
Right.
6 months and
Yeah.
all the provisions of that bill we're not supposed to be talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's relevant to this bill because that's
Yep.
if both bills pass, that would be the natural progression of where this could go. So, are you aware of how many election fraud prosecutions the Attorney General initiated between 2020 and 2022?
How many election fraud, successfully prosecuted?
Just prosecutions that the Attorney General initiated.
He had over 350 cases in 2020, and that fell by over 300 after it was deemed unconstitutional for him to prosecute election crime.
Yeah, I had 390 in that time period, but we're I think close on that point. Do you know how many of those election fraud cases resulted in convictions over that period of time?
I do have one other stat. As of the end of June 2021, the Attorney General's office has successfully prosecuted 534 cases of election fraud and has another 510 pending cases with 386 active investigations. So it's a significant problem, as you can imagine.
What period of time does that cover? Those numbers?
Since June of 2021.
Okay. I'll have to get those numbers from you because I don't have that.
But you would agree that it's a serious problem.
Well, what I would agree with that numbers I'm looking at between 2020 and 2022, that there were, of the election fraud cases prosecuted by the Attorney General, there were a total of 5 convictions. Do you agree with that?
So are you saying the right measurement would be the number of convictions?
Well, I think that's one of the measurements that prosecutors generally look to is how successful they are in actually proving their case, yes.
Okay, so in the state of Texas, over a 5-year period, there was over 1,000 hate crime cases, and during that period, only 5 successful prosecutions. So are you suggesting we should get rid of the hate crime legislation in the statute?
Not at all, not
Okay.
at all. But I would point out...
Because this bill does make an effort at consistency, so I was just curious if you wanted to apply consistency to your concern about the number of successful prosecutions.
Well, I am concerned that the numbers show that in these cases over the last few years, the Attorney General's had a conviction rate of 1.28%. So I do wonder about the efficacy of their prosecutions. But also, in a state with more than 30 million people and what now 18 million registered voters, I think.
18.6, yeah.
18.6, okay. I figured you would know the exact number, chairing the elections committee. That, we're talking about, a couple hundred, 300 cases of election fraud and 5 convictions. So in a state of 30 million people, in a state of 18.6 million voters, we're talking about infinitesimal numbers. You would agree?
No, because again, I would reference you to articles that were published late last year that showed a significant number of people that were registered to vote that weren't U.S. citizens. And then on top of that, there were several thousand individuals that were convicted of felonies that were also registered to vote. So actually, it's a significant problem in our state that needs to be addressed.
So, do you have any data in terms of these election fraud prosecutions? What percent of the prosecutions involved Texans of color?
Prosecutions that involve, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, what?
Minority Texans, black and
I don't have
Hispanic
that data.
Texans.
I don't know if that's relevant or not. I mean, I think at the end of the day, no matter what the demographic of the individual is, if there is election fraud that's occurring in the state of Texas or illegal voting. I don't know if I care about the demographics of the individual.
Okay. Well, it's just, it is striking that 45% of these cases were brought against black and Hispanic Texans, which is a much higher percentage than their share of the electorate. So I don't know what we read into that, but I think it is concerning that these cases seem to disproportionately impact Texans of color. Do you share that concern?
I share the concern that there is significant concern about election fraud and illegal voting in the state of Texas, and this bill helps address that.
Okay. So back on the number of prosecutions and convictions. So I've got some information here. Convictions by year starting in 2015. So this goes back a decade. In 2015, and you just tell me if you think these numbers sound accurate, but in 2015, there were 13 convictions. In 2016, there was 1 conviction. In 2017, 4 convictions. In 2018, 8 convictions. And in 2019 and in 2020, there were 0 convictions in both of those years. Does that sound accurate?
I would point you to the analogy that over a 5-year period in the state of Texas, there was 1,000 hate crime cases and only 5 convictions. So I don't know, unless you're willing to revisit hate crime legislation, I'm not sure what you're sharing with the body is all that relevant.
Well, I think it is relevant, Mr. Sheen, because I'm sharing information. This is a bill about election fraud, right? And penalties for election fraud. That's
Yes,
what the
sir,
bill
that's
is about.
the
And the bill's not about
statute
hate
that's
crimes.
affecting.
The bill's about election fraud. So I'm sharing data and asking you about data pertaining to election fraud, prosecutions, and convictions. So
But I think what you're doing is you're trying to highlight the number of convictions compared to the number of cases. So I'm just sharing with
yes.
you there's a similarity
You are right
with
about
hate
that.
crimes as well. So
well,
if you want to revisit hate crimes,
and hate crimes is a very important issue, but your
It
bill
is.
doesn't deal with hate crimes. So
That's
I
correct.
want to stay focused on election fraud-related prosecutions and convictions. So, so basically, if you look at those cases from 2015 through 2020, you're basically looking at a conviction rate of around 22% just in that time period. And again, that's a very small number of cases. As we discussed previously, 2020 to 2022, those cases increased to 300 some odd prosecutions.
again, I would reference you to the several thousand individuals that were found not to be U.S. citizens that were registered to vote in the state of Texas. That was an article that came out late last year. I would also point out in the article, it talked about literally thousands of individuals that have been convicted of felonies. And as you know, if you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote, yet they were registered to vote illegally and in our system. So if those 12,000 individuals had shown up to vote, they would have been allowed to vote, distorting the election results and diminishing our ability to elect those who represent us at the city, at the county, at the state, and the federal government.
Well, you're aware that after that initial story came out about however many tens of thousands potentially undocumented people were registered to vote, that it turned out those numbers were highly inflated, and in fact the number was actually much lower.
That's inaccurate. What the number is based on is, no, respectfully it's not. So what the numbers are based on is there was individuals that were found when you're comparing voter registration information to database. There was found to be that the comparison to the database would show the individual is not a U.S. citizen, so they were sent something in the mail to give them the opportunity to clear up, provide proof of citizenship, and you had 6,500 individuals that did not reply. So if you want to take the leap that those 6,500 people are all legitimate voters, you can. I would take the opposite.
Well, okay, so your position is 6,500 people didn't reply. That automatically means they're non-citizens?
Well, take 80%. I'll give you 20%.
Do you have some scientific basis for that, or is that
Well,
just
if I get a letter,
just a
and I'm
guess?
sure if you get a letter in the mail saying that you're not legal to vote. I'm sure you would rectify it. I would.
Well,
so.
you're right, I would, but Mr. Sheen, I got to tell you, I got members of my staff who are a lot younger than you and I, and they never check their mail. Let me tell you, it's that habit of checking mailboxes is I think a habit that's going to die with our generation.
Well, you can
so
speak about yourself when you talk about age.
all right, fair enough. So, Mr. Shaheen, if we pass this bill, we're gonna significantly enhance the penalty for the crime of election fraud. Let's set aside all the problems I think there are with how these prosecutions have been handled, and the fact that I think the Attorney General's office, frankly, has wasted a lot of money over the last several years on these wild goose chases. Let's set all that aside, and just your bill is going to say election fraud case. Right now, you can spend up to a year in jail. You pass your bill, you can spend up to 20 years in jail. What problem have we solved when we pass this legislation?
Well, I think it will make those types of reforms, I think, will make people think twice about conducting themselves in a manner where they're going to interfere with our elections. I think it provides consistency in our law and strengthens accountability in our election process. So I think it's really important. Again, I would go back to the consistency point that I keep raising as well.
So explain to me the consistency point again.
Well,
I've heard you say that, but I'm not following.
So
what you mean by
illegal
that.
voting in the state of Texas is a second-degree felony.
Correct.
But election fraud is only a Class A misdemeanor, so it aligns election fraud with illegal voting.
Okay.
So they both would be second-degree felonies.
So you think any type of election fraud should be the same level of offense and punishment as illegal voting?
Well, the election fraud that's called out in Section 276.013, which the bill addresses.
Okay. Can you remind me what those offenses are again?
Well, I mean, I can read them to you if you want. You want me to read them to you?
If you would, please.
I'm going to read
the
it really
text of the
fast.
bill right in front of me.
So, vote to be cast under false pretenses, prevent a voter from casting legal ballot, provide false information to a voter that prevents them from voting, on and on and on. It's in the bill, actually.
So you're going to establish consistency in punishment. You're going to align election fraud with illegal voting, and that's your goal. What is that? When you achieve that goal, what is going to be accomplished? How is that going to improve our state?
It'll ensure consistency in the law and strengthen accountability in our election system.
That's going to strengthen what?
It's going to strengthen accountability in our election system, and it'll provide consistency in the law.
Okay, I understand the consistency. I don't know why the consistency is important, because we have lots of crimes that have inconsistent punishments because someone's made a decision, the legislature's made a decision that, hey, this crime doesn't rise to the same level of offense as this crime, so it's going to have a lesser punishment or have a greater punishment. So I don't understand, as a matter of criminal law, why consistency is so important here.
Well, no, consistency is important. I mean, you're calling out different levels of crime, which would have different levels of punishment. But no, I think consistency is actually very important in punishment and law.
Well, so you say it's going to increase accountability. Do you think right now, if someone commits election fraud and they're successfully prosecuted and convicted of a Class A misdemeanor and they spend up to a year in jail, that's a lack of accountability?
No, I didn't say that, but increasing the penalty for election fraud to make it tied to illegal voting does.
Well, but I want to understand why. It seems like your argument is saying we do not have accountability right now.
It said increase accountability.
Okay, so we have an insufficient level of accountability right now.
You have an insufficient level of punishment.
Okay, so it's an insufficient level of punishment. And you don't think someone being convicted of a Class A misdemeanor, spending up to a year in jail, you don't think they'll, learn their lesson? Or what is the...
I think...
I'm just trying to understand the problem we're trying to solve for.
Well, I've stated the problem multiple times, but the consistency with illegal voting, I think, is important.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Move passage.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Martinez Fisher, for what purpose?
raise a point of order under House Bill 5115 under Rule 8, Section 1.
Please bring your point of order down front.